We've been gone for a while, and we're here. We're back. And that's the thing about going away on vacation. It's all still here when you come back. So we're picking up where we left off. Right now, there's a big issue in our district, West Contra Costa Unified School District, and having to do with our budget. So we're going to have more of a conversation than reporting out the way we have in the past, but we do want to start. My name is Consuelo Lara, and
I'm Madeline Kronenberg.
so I think we're going to start at the federal level when
Yeah.
it comes to budgets for education.
Yeah, we're going to just mention that there's a lot going on in our federal government right now. But as far as education goes, I've been posting it on Facebook so that people can see that the Secretary of Education, Ms. DeVos, is trying to expand money for charter schools. And that is a big problem because, of course, she's not expanding it. It's at the expense of district schools. That's the whole thing. And when we're talking about funding levels, it's never just that extra money is coming in. I will say the extra money that does come in for charters essentially comes from philanthropy. Right? Because they have a lot of extra connections to all sorts of corporate and other philanthropy. But the federal money that's being looked at for them would come from an overall cut to others. So that's what's happening federally, and we need to just keep paying attention to it. Certainly the teachers unions throughout the country are very aware of it. Right now, we still are in the middle of the Chicago teachers strike. There have been so many teachers strikes that I'll post this on Facebook too. There's an organization that tracks them. It says who's on strike now. That's a big change in the world of teacher activism. But teacher activism is what's going to help save our children. That's what it's really coming down to, in order to support education. So nationally, what we have are the folks that are on strike, and the changes in the charter school laws and the expansion of charter school laws in other states too, in Florida and North Carolina. There are many, many, many issues that every state has. For California, we were able to pass 1505 and 1507, and so they weren't perfect, but when you're passing litigation, when you're involved in passing legislation, you anticipate litigation, but in passing it you have to make compromises, right? And that's really what happened with these, so that the idea of a complete moratorium or closing down all the charter schools that existed wasn't going to happen. But what did happen was that the most important thing that we can now look to the fiscal consequences, the financial impact of moving children from district schools into charter schools, and consider the children in the district schools and what they will lose. We can now consider that, and that is a giant change for California, a giant change. So it's not perfect, but it is a big plus, I believe, for California.
Especially for those districts that are saturated.
Absolutely.
Ours gives us some local
Oakland
control.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It just has to, it had to happen. I mean, California has more charter schools than any other state by far, and the fact that the Broad Corporation and so many other people had as a goal that the entire state, that the entire system would change and become what New Orleans is today is unbelievably unfair. But anyway, that there haven't been any major changes statewide because the legislation was signed. And so now we move on to thinking about what new things people want to move forward into the next legislative session, and that's still to be developed over the next few months, right?
So what's going to be on the ballot, though? There's going to be...
So then there's that, and that's funding. So in 2020, there are two ballot measures that are being looked at. So one of them is schools and communities first, and that's the ballot measure to essentially repair the corporate loophole that exists in Prop 13, and to charge commercial property owners their appropriate property
Bring
tax
them out of
rate.
1970 rates,
Right.
basically.
So that's number one, and that had to be the language that had originally been drafted for that had to be changed, and so they are having to go and recollect signatures on that to put that on the ballot. And then there's another one from CSBA that's basically a millionaire's tax, and that's also something that would bring in more funding for education. So both of those are important things, and whether or not they're both actually, I don't know that it's official that both of them are on the ballot for 2020, but both of them are being discussed. And if both of them passed, it would be a huge help to move California from the bottom of the pack in terms of education funding, at least to the middle. It wouldn't even get us to the top.
No.
But it would bring us up somewhat to the middle of the pack.
So let me make some clear. Schools and communities first. That one also involves things like the parks or city.
That's the community part.
It's the
schools
community
and communities.
part. So it's not just for schools and education. So it's important for our city council members to make sure to pass resolutions in support of this, and that they also talk to their constituents to contact the legislature at Sacramento to promote that. The CSBA one is specifically for education.
Only.
Now, first I heard it was on, then I heard it was off, now I heard it's back.
Right.
So do we know where that is?
I don't know, and I think that's who's coming, the person who's going to come to the board meeting. Right, Kevin Gordon.
Okay.
So there's and he's a lobbyist for the California School Board Association.
Right.
That's who he is. And Mr. Gordon is, has his finger on the pulse. He will know exactly what is going to happen, so we're going to learn about that on Wednesday night.
Okay, so that's what's happening at the state level.
And then we get to the district.
Yes. Okay, well, as you may or may not know, we have a huge deficit of $40 million. So we, the board, will soon have to be making cuts. And this is just so controversial right now. And there's a lot of anxiety over this. And so we are, we're trying to find out what are the facts, what happened. So a lot of people are getting into the blame game, whose fault it is, etc. A lot of people are angry about their taxes. They're paying too much taxes, and they think they're getting nothing for it. So there's a lot of anxiety out there about this. And personally, I want to know, we can't change the past, but we can change, set into process in the present processes that will help us get to the future, a more healthy budget in the future. So that's kind of opened the door. Where do we start with this?
Right.
So,
and there was a presentation given on the first part of the story, right? That which framed the story as perhaps not having there be revenue shortfalls, right? That we weren't getting the money we expected. But that's not actually how it really played out. What happened was that there was overspending. So it's just like having the checkbook. We knew how much we were going to get in the checkbook. We knew that we were going to have bigger bills, the CalSTRS bills and the other bills that were that went up. We had those in projections for the past 5 years. So there were no surprises in those big areas. There may have been some surprises in one of the things that you can't really control, and that's special ed funding. So there may have been certainly surprises there. But what we do know is that there was overspending. And what is missing, and what I hope we really see from Mr. Wold as he moves forward in his efforts to fix the problem, is to become very serious about imposing a very stringent set of internal controls. So if you've got the checkbook, we need to all be checking the checkbook like every week instead of 2 or 3 times a year when there's a big financial report. Because what we have to know, and what all of our managers need to know, is whether then when they're up against their spending limits, so that they can't go over them. I'm sure we spent it on wonderful things. We spent it on overtime. We spent it on important conferences. We spent it on things that were helpful to our children, but there were things we couldn't afford. And we spent it because we didn't have controls in place to stop us and say, no, well, I'll have to do that next year because I can't afford it. So we need to have the checkbook, and I think the checkbook needs to also become, we sort of have the checkbook. We have the Tyler transparency tool, but there's nothing in there that says, and now you've reached the top, you've reached the level that you can no longer spend. You're in the red on a specific area. So that's one thing, and it's not that this hasn't happened before. Oakland has had to deal with its own fiscal vitality and has a really specific set of guidelines, and I'll actually attach it to the YouTube here so that you can see their report where they had to address how they're going to do their internal controls. And they supposedly started to do that in February 2018. So we could just see how that is working for them. And in terms of at least, just to say that their budgeting problems don't exist, but this particular kind of budgeting problem, this overspending within school budgets, or by whoever these different managers are who are overspending, that just has to stop. There has to be a system that prevents it, and that the board can see, and that the public can see.
Right, right. So what you're talking about are controls over this, and this is a checkbook.
What's a checkbook?
It's a checkbook. That's not a complicated thing.
This is not rocket science. This is not calculus. This is adding and subtracting.
Yeah. So we got a checkbook, and so what you're talking about are, rather than balancing our checkbook, 2-3 times a year, we balance that checkbook much more often.
Yeah, you balance it at every board meeting.
Why
don't we just say?
Why not?
That
means 2 times a month.
Balance
your checkbook.
Then the trust can return, because right now, as we go ahead and ask the community to consider doing another parcel tax, what you're asking them to do is to trust you with more money. Well, you wouldn't trust somebody who doesn't balance their checkbook with more money unless they said, no, now we're going to start to balance it.
Yeah. And you touched on the key word, and that's trust.
Yes.
That's what we're about right here. So that if we have these controls, that can prevent what happened in the past.
Exactly.
And that's very important to do. And that's where, talking about, I don't like to live in the past, but sometimes you have to bring that in order to, come up with some solutions to go forward. So I agree that those controls and what they would look like. And you would think our financial person would be the expert on those kinds of controls, would bring them forth and we kind of expect that, and we are being disappointed.
And that would be the story.
That
right?
should be the story. Absolutely.
That's the story, not this other story that we did here, which had to do with the fact that we had all of these bills. But we had all these bills that we knew were coming. They were not surprises. This is like paying the mortgage. Oh, I'm out of money because I had to pay my mortgage. You knew you had to pay your mortgage. That's not really why your budget didn't work.
Yeah.
Your budget didn't work because you paid for a lot of things that weren't in your budget.
Yeah. And also going forward, there's some things that need to change. It's just started, but, actually, since I've come on the board, the issue of finding things out at the last minute, I really was difficult getting used to the fact that I'm just seeing this for the first time on the night of the board meeting. That's not acceptable. Board members need to get information far in advance. And especially if something is in the agenda, there needs to be an attachment there so that I can do more research on this. And especially when it comes to issues of the budget. And this is the second time there's been a presentation, isn't there? Or is this the third?
That's the second time, right?
Well,
for sure.
what about the last one?
Yeah.
That wasn't specifically about the budget. That was about our properties.
Right.
But still,
That was there. No,
we
there was
did
no
not.
problem there.
There was.
But that presentation was there.
Oh, that presentation was there.
That was. Oh
Okay.
yes, there was no problem with that
That one was
presentation.
So anyway, as it concerns the budget, whenever there is a budget presentation, we need to see that in advance. The public, we all need to see it in advance. So it's not acceptable that it's not there. Who knows? It might show up on Monday or Tuesday. So we don't.
Well,
know.
hopefully it does.
Yeah.
But just as a general practice, that's what's fair, so that people understand whether or not they want to come and speak at a board meeting.
Exactly.
Right. So if you have if the presentation isn't there, you're sort of you're much less informed. You're not fully informed, and that's. And I certainly understand that there may be changes in it. There may be new information that comes in right before the meeting, and you add that. That's all. You just add it.
Yeah.
And people understand that. But to not have the presentation when it's something this important,
Yeah.
when you've talked about it, solutions, right? You have all of your.
Yeah.
You have you said it, high anxiety around this. And then when you choose it, that's the thing I'm not going to give you extra information on. That becomes a real problem for anybody. I mean, what came out at Solutions was that there was going to be cutbacks in two areas, right? The code numbers for them, the object codes, there were 4,000 and 5,000, right? So if he's going to have that information in this in the budget presentation, then people would want to look up, well, what is that?
What are the
Right?
4,000
And if that's me, then I might want to come to the board meeting or talk to somebody about it, right? And so that's public, because in the Tyler Transparency tool, you can put in 4,000 and 5,000 and get everybody who's under that and how much money they get paid, right? And so that's available, but it hasn't really been brought out publicly that those are the folks that are going to be looked to help pay this. And there's a lot of different strategies. I mean, you're familiar with various strategies that you can use.
I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. They may be working towards exactly what we're saying. You know, they may have that in mind. What I've learned being on the board, things don't move as fast as you want them to. Right. Hey, how come I asked you for that? There's only a million things everybody has to do. I understand that. So we do have to be patient, but I'm just really hopeful that we're going in that direction, and people understand it doesn't build trust when you leave all that out. It builds distrust, anxiety, and building that trust is very important. One of the ideas I thought about for building trust, so I was more about brainstorming ideas to balance that budget, because I know it was my first day. I had to cut these programs my first day on the board, and it was heartbreaking, because as a teacher, former teacher of the district, I knew some of these programs and how great they were and what they did, and but now it's even more. It's more than twice as much money.
Right.
You have to. So it's going to be maybe people. It may be so. To me, that kicks in. All right, let's start looking at solutions. Let's start looking at ideas for possible generating revenue, for other things we can freeze or things we can reduce. And to me, that's the work. You pull up your sleeves and you start saying, okay, where can we, make adjustments? And I really think it's going to have to be across the board. We look at everything. We look at administrator salaries. Maybe they could take a reduction. Maybe we even look at board stipends, or our vendors, knowing that they might have to reduce fees. I mean, this is going to affect everybody, because it affects everybody.
You can say a typical strategy. I mean, this isn't certainly the first public agency that's had to go through cuts, and it's not the first time this public agency has had to go through cuts. One strategy is to just say we're going to renegotiate every contract. You write a letter to every vendor and you say, we would like you to, we're going to ask you to take a 10% cut. and then see where you go from there. And that would be all your vendors. That would include your professional vendors. That would include your attorneys. That would include, right?
That's a good point.
It would include, let's not set them out separately.
Mm-mm.
If you're going to share it, you would include everybody who is involved as a professional vendor.
Absolutely. Fix our budget, and it has to affect.
I mean, at least you ask, and then you make that they'll respond or not respond,
Negotiate.
and then you see where people are in terms of who wants to be on the team that helps solve the problem.
Exactly. And if they're not, then okay, pass them on. They could go. But again, brainstorming, more ideas, building trust, solving the problem together, and I think I'm always optimistic. We can do this.
Yes,
we can do
and
this.
hopefully this is what part 2 of the story is going to say. It's just that we don't know because he didn't post it, right? But I was hoping that this is what we would see in part 2 of the story.
And just my last, I always have this thing about, I'm very suspicious of some donors sometimes, you might have noticed. So just the statement that donors are not the solution.
No.
And we never need to make sure we don't depend on donors, so-called philanthropists, which I'll talk about that at another time. But that's pretty much it for me. What do you think?
No, I think that, so it'll be, it's an important time the next couple of weeks, and I think that the key to me was the word anxiety. People don't know. This is when we were closing schools, when years ago when we were looking at the first bankruptcy. The thing that's worse, the worst thing is not knowing. And so people, the sooner we engage and get communities aware of the direction we're going and how quickly the decisions are going to be made, the clearer the communication is, the more likely we are to be able to build trust. I mean, even at our school sites, folks who are in their classrooms don't know if people that who are help support them in different programs, if they're going to continue, if they're not going to continue. It's very unclear.
Yeah, it is. It's just terrible.
And the decisions can't be made behind closed doors. You can't do it that way.
No, that's
the thing here. We need to bring it out in the public, and then the board are chosen by the community. They're there to make the decisions in public.
Exactly. No surprises, please.
Right.
So we are going to end now, and I was telling my friends here that I go to Toastmasters, and one of the things we do there is we end with a joke. So to lighten things up, and I think that's a good practice. Mm-hmm. And I have a joke. I have a great joke.
Okay.
Okay. So mother goes into her son's room and says, "Wake up, it's time to go to school. Get up." And her son says, "No, I don't want to go to school. Give me 2 reasons why." No, he says, I just don't want to go to school. And she says to him, "Why? Why not? Give me 2 good reasons you don't want to go to school. You can't go to school." "Well, because the kids, they hate me." And he says, "And also the teachers, they all hate me." And she goes, "Well, that's not good enough. You have to get up and go to school. You just have to." And he says, "Well, give me 2 good reasons why." And she goes, "Well, one is you're 52, and secondly, you're the principal."
That's very good. That's very good.
I don't want to go to school.
See you next time.
Bye-bye. Bye. Is it off?
Also, secondary shameless plug. Do my stuff. Wait, is it focused? Almost. And so close to. Still blinking. Oh, there we go. Close enough.
All right.